Okay, so Assalamu alaikum. The topic for today's discussion is cell adaptation. These are our learning objectives for today. Now, under physiological conditions, the cell maintains a steady state, which is called as homeostasis, and the state is maintained to meet the physiological demands of the cell. Stress is the body's response when it senses any kind of danger. How do humans normally respond to stress? Either they fight, they run away, they freeze, or they comply with the situation. These are the normal human responses to any kind of stressful situation. Under physiological conditions, the normal cell is confined to a very narrow range of function and structure, and this range is determined by the metabolic rate of the cell, the availability of substrates, and the constraints of neighboring cells. When cells they encounter any kind of stress, they respond by various mechanisms. First, they try to adapt. That is called as cell adaptation. If the cell is unable to adapt, or if the stimulus is very harmful, very potent, then the cell is injured and eventually it leads to cell death. As you can see in the picture, when an elastic band is stretched, when it is given a stimulus of stretch, it elongates. This is adaptation. If the band is stretched further and it is no longer able to adapt or elongate, it disfigures and eventually it breaks. These are other various mechanisms or conditions in which that we encounter during daily life, and these are all forms of adaptation. Sweating during exercise, while cooking when the food is tasted quite frequently, there comes a time when the taste is eventually lost, or you cannot identify the individual, uh, the, the individual or different types of taste. Similarly, when flowers, they are when we try to smell flowers which have a strong fragrance, eventually there comes a time when the fragrance is lost and you cannot appreciate the smell of the flowers. Some people who become adapted to sleeping in loud or noisy areas. These are the various stages of cellular response to stressful stimuli. Under normal conditions, the cell is in a state of homeostasis. When there is some kind of stress, initially the cell tries to adapt. When it is unable to adapt or the stimulus is very much harmful, the cell undergoes injury. Injury may be of two types, reversible or irreversible, and eventually after injury, the cell undergoes cell death. What is adaptation? It is the process which enables organisms to adjust to their environment or to adjust to the changes in the environment so that they can survive. Cell adaptations are reversible, functional, and structural responses of cells to changes in either the physiological states or pathological stimuli. And by adaptation, the cells they achieve new steady states. Now, cell adaptations may occur in the size, in the number, in the phenotype, which is the physical appearance, or the metabolism or function of cells. When a cell adapts, it can recover to its original state if the stressful situation is removed. These are the various types of cell adaptation: hypertrophy, in which there is an increase in the size of the cells; hyperplasia, which is an increase in the number of cells; atrophy, which is a decrease in the size, number, and metabolic activity of cells; and metaplasia, which is a change in the phenotype of the cells. This is a picture showing the various types of cell adaptation. Now, the cell's response to stressful stimuli, it depends on their ability to divide. Cells which are capable of division, they can respond to stressful stimuli both by hyperplasia and hypertrophy. So they can increase in number or they can increase their size in order to adapt. While non-dividing cells, they can only increase their size for adaptation. They cannot multiply. According to the ability of to divide cells or tissues, they are divided into three types: labile, stable, and permanent. Labile cells are those stem cells which divide repeatedly, like the surface epithelium of the intestine, the bone marrow containing the hematopoietic cells. These are labile cells and they can adapt by hyperplasia as well as hypertrophy. Stable cells like hepatocytes or bone cells, they can only divide under certain conditions. Usually, they adapt by hypertrophy. And permanent cells like neurons or cardiac muscle and skeletal muscle, they cannot divide, so they adapt only by hypertrophy, by increasing the size of the cells. Now, in hypertrophy, there is an increase in the size of the cells, which leads to increased size of the organ. Hypertrophy may be physiological or pathological. Physiological hypertrophy can be because of increased workload, like the bulging muscles of bodybuilders, or it can be induced by hormones, like the hypertrophy of uterus during pregnancy. Pathological hypertrophy can occur in cases of hypertension because of increased blood pressure in the arterial circulation. The left side of the heart, the muscle in the left side of the ventricle, it increases in size. So this is pathological hypertrophy because it is occurring because of a disease. The mechanism of hypertrophy involves increased production and assembly of cell proteins. So more proteins are formed which lead to increase in the size of the cells. Hyperplasia is an increase in the number of cells which ultimately results in increase in the size of the organ. Hyperplasia may also be physiological or pathological. Physiological hyperplasia is further divided into two types. It can be hormonal due to hormones or compensatory due to growth factors. In cases of hormonal hyperplasia, the increase in the number of cells is because of some hormone like proliferation of glandular epithelium of the female breast at puberty and during pregnancy. Compensatory hyperplasia occurs when there is a need for compensation after damage or resection, like generation of hepatocytes after resection of the liver, or in cases of blood loss when the bone marrow starts to produce more and more blood cells under the action of erythropoietin. Pathological hyperplasia is excessive or inappropriate action of hormones or growth factors on the target cells, which ultimately leads to increase in number of the cells. This is an abnormal type of growth, but still controlled because it is under the action of growth factors. It increases the chances for malignancy. A good example is endometrial hyperplasia, which occurs because of prolonged exposure to estrogen, and it increases the risk for endometrial cancer. Other examples include benign prostatic hyperplasia, which occurs in response to stimulation by androgens. So the number of cells in the prostatic glands increase. Similarly, in cases of viral infections, skin warts and mucosal lesions composed of hypoplastic epithelium, the number of cells increases because of pathological conditions. So this is pathological hyperplasia. What is the underlying mechanism of hyperplasia? It is because of hormone or growth factor driven proliferation of mature cells, leading to increased output of new cells, and also from the stem cells which produce more and more new cells. Like we discussed before, labile cells and stable cells, they can undergo hyperplasia. Stable cells can only undergo hyperplasia in certain situations. After partial resection of the liver, growth factors are produced that engage receptors on the surviving hepatocytes, and they lead to proliferation of new liver cells. Under stressful conditions, hyperplasia is the increase in the number of cells, and hypertrophy is increase in the size of the cells. Atrophy is another form of cell adaptation, and it is a reduction in the size of organ or tissue due to decrease in cell size and number. So ultimately, the metabolic activity and function of the tissue is also reduced. It may be physiological or pathological. Physiological atrophy occurs during normal development. Notochord and thyroglossal duct, they also undergo atrophy during fetal development. The size of the uterus after childbirth decreases. This is also because of physiological atrophy. And loss of estrogenic stimulation after menopause results in atrophy of the endometrial lining, the vaginal epithelium, and the glandular epithelium of the breast. Pathological atrophy may be local or it may be generalized. It occurs because of various causes, which may be disuse, denervation, diminished blood supply, inadequate nutrition, loss of endocrine stimulation, and due to pressure effects. Disuse atrophy occurs usually when a bone is fractured and immobilized, so the muscles that are attached to the bone because they are not being used, they undergo atrophy. Denervation atrophy occurs when the nerve supply to a muscle is cut off or it is damaged. The muscles cannot be stimulated by the nerves and they undergo atrophy. Reduced blood supply due to atherosclerosis or due to aging can result in diminished blood supply to the brain and can result in atrophy of the brain. If the nutrition is adequate, like in malnutrition or in cases of cancer or chronic inflammatory diseases, this can also result in generalized atrophy. And this is because of chronic overproduction of tumor necrosis factor, which is an inflammatory cytokine. It suppresses the appetite and also leads to depletion of lipid stores. So inadequate nutrition can also lead to atrophy of the muscles. Then pressure atrophy can occur because of pressure effects of an enlarging tumor or a mass that can lead to compression of the surrounding uninvolved tissues and cause atrophy. If the endocrine stimulation is lost, this can also lead to atrophy. For example, if exogenous corticosteroids are given, steroids are given from the outside, they can result in lack of pituitary stimulation and result in shrinkage of adrenal gland. Atrophy occurs because of decreased protein synthesis and increased degradation of protein in the cells. And this degradation occurs by the ubiquitin proteasome pathway. Ubiquitin is a protein that when attaches to the protein substrate that has to be broken down, it becomes more palatable for the proteasome. The proteasome, it has enzymes for digestion. And when this protein substrate, it is engulfed by the proteasome, it is broken down into small amino acids. So in atrophy, the protein degradation, it increases. Metaplasia is another form of cell adaptation. It is a reversible change in which one differentiated cell type, it can be an epithelium or mesenchyme, is replaced by another cell type in response to stress. And this metaplasia occurs so that the new epithelium or the new mesenchyme, it can withstand the adverse environment more efficiently. Metaplasia can also increase the risk of cancer or malignancy. Metaplasia occurs because of reprogramming of the stem cells or the undifferentiated mesenchymal cells in the connective tissue. There is no change in an already differentiated cell type. So the mature cells which are already present, they do not convert into new cells. Rather, it is the stem cells that are reprogrammed and they differentiate along the new pathway. There are two types of metaplasia, epithelial or mesenchymal. Examples of epithelial metaplasia include the change of pseudostratified columnar epithelium of the respiratory tract into stratified squamous epithelium by smoking. Change of stratified squamous epithelium of the esophagus into intestinal epithelium because of acid reflux. Then the low columnar epithelium of the excretory ducts of salivary glands, pancreas, and bile ducts. When there is stone impaction in these ducts, the columnar epithelium, it changes into stratified squamous epithelium. Also, in cases of vitamin A deficiency, the normal ciliated columnar epithelium of the cornea, it changes into squamous epithelium. So these are all forms of epithelial metaplasia. Mesenchymal metaplasia is when there is formation of cartilage, bone, or adipose tissue in tissues that normally do not contain these mesenchymal elements. For example, bone formation in muscle after trauma. So the four forms of adaptation include atrophy, hypertrophy, hypoplasia, and metaplasia. This is all. Thank you.